So, hi everyone, and thank you for letting us have this update. The Advocacy and Public Policy Committee has been very busy in the past year, and I'd just like to share, these are the members who are part of it and who show up at those 7 a.m. meetings. And then we're often joined by other member organizations who have a particular issue they want to bring forward or want to be able to learn from the group. And I think what's significant about this is that there are 9 different countries that are represented. We have North America, South America, we have Asia, Europe, and Oceania that are represented. And I think it's important that that's expressed because it really does help to inform the conversations. I'd also like to thank our Advocacy and Public Policy Committee for their work. And like Richard Cave, I was taking notes earlier, and I think it's a good thing that this is reflective on the work we've done the past year and that I already have a slide done for the work we'll be doing in the next year, because that list, as I've been taking notes today, has become increasingly long as we've heard about the work that it will need to be undertaken by the fundamental rights. And as we hear about some of the issues around the world, there's obviously no end to the advocacy needs that our community faces. And so as this committee is working, it's how can we make sure that we're laser focused and how can we do the work that's necessary. So we start off with what is our mandate? And the first piece is to provide advice to the board of directors, which really is an internal focus. And then we think about, but how can we make our members stronger so that they can advocate within their own countries and we can provide that platform on global issues. So we think about being globally informed, but a common position. We think about how we can do the capacity building. And again, that's so that members can take back this information and advocate within their own countries. So often we're sharing resources and information, and we'll be sharing some of the future work that we'll be undertaking in 2024 that will help even more. And then what we're increasingly seeing is how can the work of this group and the Alliance help to elevate issues for the ALS community on a global stage, whether it's at the United Nations or the World Health Organization, making sure that that visibility is there. And we've heard a bit about that earlier today. So in this past year, we really focused on 4 key areas. We did take a look at the fundamental rights of people with ALS, MND, and their caregivers. We looked at the equitable access to therapies on a global scale. And this conversation is really changing and evolving. And I think about the 10 years that I've been actively involved with ALS organizations and how that's changed, or the 15 years since my family member had been diagnosed. We're going to talk a bit about the global exposure and that elevation of needs, and then how this group has continued to identify and articulate emerging issues. So, David?
So I might just talk very briefly about the fundamental rights, and it'll be very brief because of the fact that the PCAC did a wonderful presentation, so I can't sort of replicate what they said, but you can sort of start to see some of the connections that the ITAC committee are making in regard to the results from the fundamental rights for people with ALS and caregivers. And similarly with the Policy and Advocacy Committee, as Tammy said, that we're starting to give some consideration to some of the observations and the data that have come through the survey results. And now that we've actually got 2 sets of survey results, it's starting to build a picture in terms of what do we need to do from a public policy perspective and from an advocacy perspective, both at a global level as well as at a country level. I mean, there are some big challenges that you know, certainly the PCAC had raised, and ITAC had also touched on in regard to the lack of equity of access across global south, global north, and access to health treatments and health support and a whole range of things. So I think there are a lot of challenges there and lots of things for the committee to reflect on in the foreseeable future.
We have dueling clickers.
Oh, do we? Oh, we do.
There you go.
Okay. Yeah, there's probably nothing I can add at this point. Yeah, thank you. Sorry.
So then I'd like to talk to you a bit about one of the most major projects that we've undertaken this year, and it's around a position paper that's been developed on equitable access to therapies on a global scale. And what we were finding is that for a while, the conversation was largely existing between the US and Canada, and Kalanit and I have given presentations on this in the past. And it really was about how can we get that access. And we were looking at the experiences that we had in our two countries and helping to inform others. But that's not enough now, because no one with ALS cares that you can get a therapy within a certain boundary unless it includes theirs. And so more importantly, it's how can we look at it around the world, but across all of the spectrum of access. And when you think about very early on in drug discovery and clinical trials, how can we ensure that there are more people around the world that get access? And when we follow that continuum right through to market access, I think for many of us, naively, that probably came from the ALS space and not more of a clinical space, we thought that when a therapy was approved, people would get access. And so often that's not even what happens in a country like Canada, where we've got drugs that are approved, but that doesn't mean Canadians can get access to them because there's still reimbursement issues or other access issues. And so how can we look at that continuum and help to inform the different stakeholders along it to be able to provide some guidance? And this is a really important graphic that demonstrates that. So at the very edge, we start with that drug discovery. How can we make sure that academic researchers, industry, is well informed about the needs of our community? And increasingly, we see some of these groups, particularly industry, coming to speak to our organizations or coming to speak to the Alliance, making sure that as they're developing trials, they're truly considering the needs of our community. And again, when you look further downstream, sometimes those initial clinical trial criteria that are put forward actually create barriers further out. And so if we can help to inform those in a more improved way at the outset, it might actually help further down. When we think about the regulatory review, we can take an opportunity to learn. So regulatory review means within your country, data set is presented, information is presented by the sponsor, and your health technology, your regulatory body will assess for safety, efficacy. Well, in Canada, we can look at that from a Health Canada perspective. But again, as I've mentioned, that doesn't mean it's going to be accessible. When we think about health technology assessment, this ends up being a consideration of, is there going to be value for the outcome of what is proposed by this therapy? And too often, we're not seeing, again, that that's taking into account the needs of our community. So how can we make sure that that's a consideration? And then further on to the coverage and whether or not something will be paid for, either by perhaps within the healthcare system or by a payer as well, an insurance company. And so throughout that spectrum, what are the opportunities? And so this diagram is largely the basis of what we've used for the position paper. And as we look forward, that will be some of the work for next year. And very much the roundtable for 2024. And our PCAT group identified that that was happening in February. So we'll be bringing this paper forward. And this is an opportunity where all of our members can learn from these experiences, can help to make sure that it's well informed, and can be able to take it back. We'll be looking for them to be able to leverage a global position. Again, as industry is engaging with the Alliance or with your organizations within your countries, that they can truly understand the needs of our community, the nuance. Too often, again, when you're looking at access to a therapy, often the assessments that are done are not a progressive neurological disease, but instead it's like a cancer. Did the tumor get smaller? Well, how can you prove slowing progression? And so we've got some challenges. And we're going to be looking forward to a global listening session with regulators. And this is based upon something that we saw, again, I'm using a Canadian experience, but this was really a first that we'd seen, where Health Canada was trying to find a patient community to be able to address some needs within their own system. And so they brought forward the ALS community as a trial. And so we're looking forward to sessions like that with global regulators, again, so that they can understand the uniqueness of the ALS experience. And even from this point, we've seen that in France, they utilized some of the information that was provided to be able to go and get compassionate use for AMX 0035. So we're seeing that our members are helping to benefit from this.
So I'm going to talk about global exposure, and it was a few years ago the Board of Alliance had thought it was really important to connect much closer with the United Nations and the World Health Organization. And it's only in recent times that the committee has given some thought as to what that could potentially look like. So as you can see on the screen, we sort of see the role of the Alliance as being a sort of a gateway to the United Nations and also to the WHO for ALS-MND. And probably it's more, the focus is probably more on WHO than the UN, but certainly in terms of the various conventions and other things that the UN have responsibility for, we certainly take those into consideration. But in regard to the WHO, it really is around how do we support the WHO to shape access globally for quality of healthcare, treatments and life. And so we sort of think it's really important to work with the WHO, and it's sort of that mutual benefit. What can we do for them in terms of supporting them, and then what can they do for us? And one of the things that we can really support them is around their global action plan on epilepsy and other neurological disorders. It's slightly unfortunate the emphasis is on epilepsy in the title, but the report is actually across the whole neurological spectrum of diseases. Let's just go back a bit. And so it's really about how do we support the WHO in regard to progressing the global action plan? How does it align with the fundamental rights? The WHO is very much focused on promoting brain health across promoting brain health full stop, but it's really about how do we drill down in terms of brain health for people living with ALS-MND, and then how do we actually advocate for actions to be undertaken by member governments? And some of those actions might be we as the conduit for the WHO to support our members to think about certain actions under the action plan, and that will certainly provide, I think, a better focus for the achievement of the plan for the WHO. It's also focusing on I think the brain health is a really important aspect in regard to, around mental health, well-being, and those sorts of issues that are really fundamental in regard to people living with ALS-MND as well as other conditions. Related to all of that, again, under the WHO banner is they have responsibility for their Rehabilitation 2030 initiative. And that's an initiative where it's focused on drawing attention to the unmet needs for rehabilitation worldwide, and highlights the importance of strengthening health systems to provide rehabilitation. And as we all know, and particularly as was articulated through the Fundamental Rights Survey, that unfortunately we have a lot of disparity across the world in regard to health systems. And so if we, in working with the WHO, and particularly under that umbrella of the Rehabilitation 2030 initiative, there will be aspects of that will provide us with insights as to how we can help strengthen the health systems or advocate for the strengthening of health systems to provide better rehabilitation for people with ALS-MND. And when we're talking about rehabilitation, it's really about around supports, assistive technology, and those sorts of things. So where to next in terms of the WHO in particular? So Kathy Cummings and I are meeting with the WHO week after next to talk about some of these issues and other things, and that's sort of the first conversation that we're going to have with them, and I'm sure there'll be many. So thank you.
And so just as we wrap up, at every meeting, it ends up that we do bring forward other issues that are hitting in the world. And so as Turkey was experiencing the earthquakes. We were able to hear from Hilmi what their community was experiencing, and that helped to inform some of the other work that the Alliance undertook. Obviously, we heard from Efrat earlier about Israel and the consideration there for the community and what it means. Access and liberty issues. Marcella's always one to be able to bring forward the experiences of what's happening, and it helps us to understand more on a global level. And even in this most recent meeting, as we heard from the U.S., about some of the concerns that they have about some of the access to power wheelchairs and what that means. So increasingly, we see that these conversations are informing our global efforts. And so with that, we have a couple of minutes for questions, I believe. As I have my moderator here, I feel like I've got a little bit more room.
No, just take your time.
Thank you.
Question over there, thank you.
Thank you guys so much.
It's working.
Okay. With the meetings coming up with the WHO and the topic of brain health, that is very interesting for us. A lot of the discussions on brain health across the world are about preventing dementia. And, I don't think there's been as much consideration for people at genetic risk for ALS, FTD, or other adult onset dementias that are inherited as people who really should be thinking about their brain health, like really directly, if it's true that it does address neurological diseases, then people should be going full stop in using those measures. But I really don't know that the evidence is there. We had a meeting, David was there, and other people from the, Neil was there, and the concept of those brain health measures being applicable to people at genetic risk for ALS and FTD wasn't really fully embraced as likely benefiting people. So just wanted to ensure that you had that background going into that conversation.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful, and I think there's a level of the lack of clarity and probably some ignorance across a whole range of different diseases around brain health, and certainly the WHO are keen to really push the brain health concept, and so I think for us, as I said, it's an early discussion with them around sort of what that looks like within ALS, MND, but thank you for that background, which we'll keep in mind. Any other questions?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Evie de Viert, and I'm CEO of ALS Belgium. I don't have a question. I just want to say something because I think this is a really good initiative, that those things are happening. And for all the people of Europe, we have an ALS EU coalition, and that was also presented on the United Nations, where we work together with policy recommendations on diagnosis, care, and treatment. So for anyone who is interested of Europe for those policy recommendations, you can come to me for a hard copy, or you can also have it digital.
Thank you, Evie. Any...
Man thing to do on Monday, I request maybe even I track and advocate group, and we had do in advocating some giant tech company, maybe like Google, to work on eye tracking on mobile phone. Like now we have on computer iPad. Many people are more accessible on the mobile. So if we can get that on mobile, our life will become much easier.
Thank you, Hamanji. So adding another one to the list with eye tracking on mobile devices. All right, this is a very long list, but I agree with working with ITAC. And I think we've even in our conversations this morning seen the overlap between the councils and committees and the work that we're doing. So thank you for adding that.
Any further questions?
Sunny did have one that she had just chatted to me, and it was about ensuring that there was good representation as well at the roundtable and involvement. And so, just as I had briefly mentioned that roundtable in February, that's going to be available to all members to be able to participate in and make sure that we are having a really good conversation, because I've just presented just a very brief overview of the position paper, but we'll be diving in a lot deeper as we go forward. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Tammy.